The PicoScope has a very long acquisition memory, and in fact it can be selected up to a length of 1 gigasamples, which is a very long record length for this price range of instrument. But the time-based window has to be set long enough to allow the digitizer to collect that number of samples to fill the memory. So to illustrate this, I'm going to decrease my selected record length to 1 million samples, and then we can view how many samples we have actually acquired on this particular time-based setting. So under the Views menu, under the Views property, we can actually see that on this particular setup with the digitizer, which is a 5 gigasample, it was only managing to acquire 500,000 samples. The 5 is just to take care of the endpoints. So I would have to double the time window to acquire 1 million samples. So if I make the time window 20 microseconds per division, now we can see on this particular digitizer we managed to achieve the 1 million samples into the record. So I'm just going to stop the acquisition. So another use of the memory is buffers. So the default value is 32 buffers. So we've actually acquired 32 buffers, each of 1 million samples. So now we could step through the acquired buffers. In fact, we look at the data, we can see that each acquisition has slightly different data. Or this can be used with a graphical icon, and it can graphically step through the acquired buffers. And this is very useful if we're looking for a particular glitch on any acquisition data. And the reason we'd want to do that is we can actually select up to 10,000 buffers, and this is available in the Tools Preferences menu, and here we can set up the number of buffers up to 10,000. The acquisition is also affected by the trigger selection. So if we, for example, select a single trigger, again we could increase the chosen record length up to 1 gigasample points, and then again the time window has to be long enough to achieve that record length. So if I find, so here we've only acquired 1 million samples, so we'd have to increase the time window to 20 milliseconds, and then if we do an acquisition, now we've managed to start to acquire 1 gigasample. In fact, now it has acquired that number of samples and filled the memory and stopped. Another trigger selection is the rapid mode. So I'll just do the go back to the default setup. So under the trigger now, I'm going to select rapid. This is another special trigger mode that as rapidly as possible it will acquire data into a buffer and minimize the dead time between triggers. So this is be good for looking for a random event. So we can select the number of buffers. So if I select say 30 buffers, and again we'd need to have a sufficiently long record length to acquire the chosen data length. So I'm going to set this back to 1 million samples. Now I'm going to acquire the data. So now we've got our 30 buffers, and again we can step through the individual buffers and see that again the data is slightly different. So this is very useful for looking, say, for a random event, and you want to minimize the dead time. In fact, the data is all collected and then displayed, so to minimize any display time.